Good evening and welcome to Solutionary TV. I am your host, Dr. Tatiana, and tonight we're going to be taking a really cool left turn into discussions of what really exists in all of that dark space, dark matter that science is getting really savvy about, that happens to be the true nature of our reality. If we, through our human perceptions in our cones and rods, can really only see about 4.7% of what is actually there in matter and dark space or dark energy. What are we sharing space with, and how does that have an influence on us? Well, I was recently at a conference in London, the Human Evolution and Consciousness Conference, and there was a tremendous speaker that was there that I've had the privilege to build some professional rapport with. And he touched on a topic that really delves deeply into not only what exists in that space, both in light and dark aspects, but also how that has an influence over us. And I am excited to introduce you to him tonight. His name is Curtis Childs, and he is with the Swedenborg Foundation. Let me tell you a little bit about Curtis. He is in the digital media producing aspect of promoting the Swedenborg Foundation and the host of the weekly web series Swedenborg and Life on Off the Left Eye YouTube channel. While obtaining his degree in communication studies at Oakland University, Curtis experienced an internal battle with depression that led him to questioning God, his own existence, and his lifelong interest in the Swedenborgian theory. After a period of intense suffering, he discovered and recovered from his depression with the help of modern medicine, therapy, and a return to the spirituality and the uplifting messages he found through Swedenborg's writings. Now Curtis is combining his desire to help others with his educational background by producing inspirational and thought-provoking video content for other spiritual seekers of various faith backgrounds from all over the world. His youthful vitality, mature presence, and his deeply rooted spirituality makes it easy for Curtis to talk about taboo topics, I know this well, like the afterlife and out-of-body, near-death, and paranormal experiences in a way that resonates across generations, cultures, and religions. Curtis has accumulated more than 400 Facebook likes, 9.7 million views, and 77 million minutes watched on YouTube. And he has appeared on a number of programs, including Talknosis, Sunday Morning Spiritual, The Butterfly Moment, Dark 30 Radio, and many more. His work has been featured on the Dr. Oz Show, and he was a speaker at the recent conference that I just mentioned. A lot of accomplishment and a lot of on-the-ground work, Curtis. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I feel like that's a lot to live up to in my intro there, but I'm going to do my best.
Well, you have a unique way of presenting the material that I really hold in high regard, and I think that it draws in the true seeker with an inquisitive and a playful and a non-dogmatic approach that makes it really easy to follow and wrap the science and some of our own, proclivities and philosophies on. But I think that it's important that when it's changed your own life and you recognize that some of these answers have helped you to deal better with your own depression, you're the perfect person to bring this information forward. I know that most of our listeners don't know a lot about Swedenborg, so I want to talk a little bit about how your own seeking and the depression that you experienced led you to discover, just briefly, Swedenborg's work and how you first started implementing it so that we can go from there.
Sure. I mean, I had a period around 18, 19, which I found out later that a lot of people actually have this where, I started to come down with what was later diagnosed as depression. But you hear that word depression and you think of, oh, I'm in a blue mood. I don't have any energy. But the thing I experienced and that a lot of people experienced was actually very, very chaotic and frenetic. And it was just, to describe it quickly would be to say that everything in my mind kind of turned against me. Like all my thoughts were just trying to lead me in these patterns that would get me more and more upset, frightened, miserable, all that stuff. My emotions didn't, seem to be working against me, and I would get triggered by things all the time. It just was very confusing, and I didn't really know what to do with it. So as as you said in that bio, there was a lot of steps to climbing out, but there was this crucial piece that Swedenborg provided that without that, I don't think I would have gotten as far as I did. And as you said, if something helps you, you feel like an obligation to try to pass it along, even if it's something
Exactly.
as weird as a Swedenborg, which we'll get all into. But I feel like yeah, you just feel like I've got to do something. I've got to tell people, because there could be people in my position that no one thing is going to cure everything for people, but if I can give them a tool to add to their toolbox
Hmm.
that's going to help them in this the dark night of the soul that we go through, then I'm going to try to do it. And that's what we're trying to do together, me and my team at the Swedenborg Foundation.
Yeah. Thank you for making that so succinct and personal. When we were at the conference, there was a lot of other guest speakers that were talking about, consciousness as we are an evolving society. We talked about, neurochemical response and DNA. And there was a lot of high energy around, gosh, I can do anything with this information. The speakers were real perky, and the topics were relevant to really fire us up. And they had your particular speaking segment at the end of the conference. And you may recall, and I would like our viewers to be aware, there was some times as you're expressing some of the content that Swedenborg revealed and really wanted to make known to the world in terms of Western medicine and mental health, and how we appreciate or how we perceive others that are dealing with their own dark night of the soul or with mood disorders, whatever it happens to be, that there's more going on there. And every now and again, you'd preface with, so, okay, it's going to get a little weird now, or okay, I hope you're okay with this. And I remember how
Yeah.
profoundly I felt compelled to say, don't apologize. We need this stuff, Curtis. There is a whole world in this Western world where we've just let go of some of the Eastern understanding that does still exist and is practiced as some of their applications to medicine that are helping others to realize it isn't all just me. It isn't just this self-persecuting prison we're in. And we really need this information. So I'm so grateful you're here tonight. Tell us a little bit about how Swedenborg stumbled into this arena of self-knowledge and experience beyond just his own personal proclivities to spirituality or what he thought existed in that dark space, dark matter.
Yeah, so Swedenborg was a guy who, just the briefest of bios on him, he was a scientist living in the mid 1700s, or early 1600s to late 1700s, he was living at a time in which science had only progressed far enough that one person could actually almost learn all of it
Hmm.
at once. Yeah, and he was one of those people. He was universally regarded as brilliant, and had made all these major contributions in all these diverse fields. He was a leading voice in anatomy. He had had a high position in Sweden's mining industry, which at the
Hmm.
time was a very powerful industry. He was doing experiments in designing proto flying machines and all these sorts of things. He was figuring out how the whole physical world worked. But through his studies, the whole time he was looking to try to find the answers to questions that went beyond the physical, which is what, not just how is life like it is, but why is life like it is? Why do we go through the things that we go through? Is there something outside of this? Is there God? Is there life after death? So he had been throwing himself into these questions. He was actually doing all this anatomical research to try to find, he was making all these discoveries, but he's looking for the seat of the soul. Like,
Yeah.
where does today we'd say, where does consciousness reside in the body? And he sort of hit a wall. And it was around then that he almost spontaneously, his dreams began to get more vivid, and he very quickly progressed. And he actually, which is remarkable for his time, kept a journal of his own dreams,
Hmm.
and like did this psychoanalyzing of them. And remember, this is well before Freud, so there wasn't any discipline, but he would write down what he thought the symbols in them meant, and he was just trying to figure it out. And so you can see him document his own progression into what we would now call having a lasting series of spiritual experiences or out of body experiences, in which he wrote that he got to see the remaining part of the equation. Like, there's the
Yeah.
physical world and the life that we experience here in it, but is that the whole story? What's behind what he found was this: what you and I are experiencing here, the physical world and our consciousness, is kind of like the skin of reality. It's the outermost level, and there's a whole machine behind it that
Hmm.
leads to these results. It's like the causes are in this other part of life, and the results are here where we are. And to him, this was the missing piece. And once he found that, he had to publish as much as he possibly could, because he felt like strongly that he had found these keys to life that should be common knowledge.
Right, right. And obviously he did such a good job of asking, doing the Q&A when he was in those lucid states of receptivity, that he was able to catalog and actually kind of map out a context for it, didn't he, Curtis? Of,
Yes.
here may be a higher and lower order of intelligence that exists through this veil that we are finding perceptible, maybe not always visually, but we can hear voices in our head. There might be some clairaudience going on or some claircognizance going on. And those that are particularly sensitive for whatever reason, whatever their predisposition is, may fall prey to being so receptive to that other realm that they could experience more of a state of madness or disassociation, multiple personality disorder, what we would refer to as schizophrenia. And without understanding that huge 95+% of what is outside our visual perception and what we consider to be real matter by modern day science, our current medical model would be insufficient to properly care for and compassionately address what is plaguing others. You mentioned in your particular presentation that when Swedenborg presented this to his peers, that it was not well received, and also that Van Dusen kind of picked up and tried to replicate through his own experimentation some understanding around what was happening with his patients in terms of their being persecuted with voices, and ended up correlating with Swedenborg. Can you talk a little bit about how the medical profession handled it, both when Swedenborg came out and what Van Dusen was able to do to corroborate?
Yeah, so Swedenborg had a lot to lose, because as I said, he was doing very well for himself. He was a respected figure in the scientific world. He was kind of a rock star at the time. The nobility all liked him. So by taking this huge turn when he started to have these spiritual experiences and beginning to write things about, I was able to visit spiritual world and speak with people who had passed on and these sorts of things. It doesn't sit well. So he got attacked actually from all sides, because there was sort of the scientific materialist community mocking him for abandoning what they felt like was abandoning science. And then there was the church, which at the time was pretty much a theocracy where he was in Sweden. And they were saying, like, you're telling me that you visited heaven and can give us details on it, but yet you're saying that you don't have to be a Christian to go to heaven, all these sorts of things that didn't fly well with them at the time. So it wasn't a good career move for him. But he gauged it, and it was worth it. And so the Van Dusen that you mentioned so Wilson Van Dusen was a chief psychologist at Mendocino State Hospital in California. And he was a spiritual connoisseur. Like, he was reading everybody, studying on it, thinking hard about it. And Swedenborg was one of the people that he followed most deeply. And during Van Dusen's time at this state hospital, he was doing a lot of close work with people who you would call schizophrenic, or who were hearing voices. And what he began to do this sort of phenomenological study where he would catalog what people told him the hallucinations were saying, and rather than just dismiss them or brush them off, he wanted to try to document them if he could. And it was through this attempt at documentation that he found not just consistency in what seems like the inner worlds of the patient, but that Swedenborg's work and everything that Swedenborg had recorded about his own experiences brought the structure and the answers necessary to really make sense of his findings. And that's what I think you find with Swedenborg in general, is that you don't need Swedenborg to tell you that people have spiritual experiences or there's something else. People have those all the time. But because, as you mentioned, Swedenborg was so rigorous in it, he had been trained as a scientist, and so he kept that mindset. He wasn't just recording experiences, he was recording the systems behind experiences. That was what made it so that his material could be something, a tool that a Van Dusen could use. And so in short, the conclusion they both reached was people who are telling you that they're having an experience, that they are seeing things that shouldn't be there, and that there's a world that seems to be consistent that they're exploring, those people aren't just making that up, that there is actually something that we should listen to.
Right. Right. And actually it's so a cruelty to not be listening to them and documenting and trying to draw reasonable correlations, because we do have a wealth of religious, or at the very least spiritual, philosophy to be able to draw on, going back, well past modern religions and Sumerian belief systems, Hermetic belief systems, Egyptology. There is such a wealth of data to be able to research and take a look at. And most of us have to admit that there are times of lucidity that we can't explain, that we just somehow clear visually, clear audiently, clear cognizantly. We know, we sense, we feel things that don't seem to be in this immediate 3D representation of our physiological senses. And we have a tendency to write them off a little bit, which is unfortunate, because it is a whole evolution, I believe, of what we have the capacity to do and be. And in practice, as an energy intuitive, it's impossible to not pick up on that information. And that has been a huge aspect of my career for quite some time, and helping my clients to realize we're all intuitive. It's really just a matter of you're giving yourself permission. It would be lovely in my research with Eastern mental health and some medical models where they still refer to some of the subtler energies. They even give them a name in a lot of the Eastern application. They would refer to maybe something sentient outside of us as kui. We talk about entity attachments. We understand that there's a language for it. And it's actually looked at in the mental health world, mostly outside of the West, as what could be another contributing factor to this chronic condition, or what could be another factor to why this person is constantly getting into lapses of consciousness that makes them feel out of control, or that there's someone else that's at the helm. And so it's beautiful that Swedenborg tried to bring this. I know Van Dusen kind of put it out there without putting too much attachment to it. There was another mental health professional, another doctor, is it Karlinski? What was the name of the gentleman who really kind of came through and tried to get a little bit more implementation in our modern mental health?
Sure. Yeah. Well, so I've been having a good time following this chain, from Swedenborg to Van Dusen to Marzinski. Was the third. Yes, which is tough to remember on its own. And I actually got to meet. I didn't get to meet Van Dusen and obviously Swedenborg, but I did get to meet Jerry Marzinski, who was working in the mental health field for more than 20 years, and a lot of that was spent at correctional institutions. And he initially, through a series of interactions with patients, became convinced that there's something more going on than he got trained to deal with. And so he was frantically searching for source material, or what is going to help me unpack these experiences that I have that he didn't really have a box to put in. And he actually came in contact with Van Dusen and found Swedenborg, so was able to, through those pieces, kind of put it together, that there's this framework that only through that is this making sense. It's only through taking what the patients tell you and saying that, hey, they're not just making this up, because the hallucinations they describe are too goal-directed, they're too consistent, they display too much similarity from patient to patient to just be a randomly generated figment of the imagination every time. And I think that even if somebody out there has never had what you would call a clairvoyant experience or a spiritual experience, there's still a way to kind of check this out. Because if Swedenborg and Van Dusen and Marzinski are all describing the underlying conditions that create the conscious experience that we have, you should be able to see the ripple effects in your normal consciousness. Like, I haven't had what I would call like an overt, obvious spiritual experience, but like I said before, my mind was so difficult to manage that it left, like, the explanations I was getting, that the purely materialist, reductionist explanations were not, first of all, not satisfying, because it didn't seem to fit the experience, but second of all, not helpful. It was only through Swedenborg saying, like, that just because it's in your head doesn't mean it's yours, and doesn't mean it has your best interest in mind. By allowing this idea that maybe we're part of a larger network, or there's a larger substrate that we're operating in. It's not just like we're little silos of consciousness. When I started, and it didn't matter how far out it seemed, because when I started to apply it, my own head got a lot easier to navigate, and I was able to gain leverage through the ideas that I couldn't get through anything else. So
Right.
it's sort of like anybody can test this anytime, not in like the theory. Like right now, science doesn't quite know why there are these cosmological constants or whatever that run the universe. So you propose a theory, which is this multiverse theory, and you can't measure whether or not there's a multiverse, but the idea would explain the results we get. So I think it's
Right.
the same sort of thing. Maybe you feel like you can't go out there and see, are there spirits that are affecting how we think and feel? Is there a life beyond death? Is there sort of a spiritual world? But you can look at your own results in your mind and say, given me imagining that that's the case, does it work here in the theater of my own consciousness? And that can be some of the most powerful testing there is.
Right. It's kind of like taking Occam's razor to another level. You're reverse engineering these theories and saying, listen, I can't prove that they're right, but I'm going to apply them and I'm going to see whether or not I'm getting the kind of results that are, again, creating clarity, empowerment. Do I see the mosaic building here? Does it look related and tied? And I think that that's so important, and it must be important on a global scale, because as I am looking at your ability to fill a conference room and sharing this information that Swedenborg has passed on to the masses through your YouTube channel, the amount of hits are profoundly demonstrative that folks are not getting the answers, particularly in the Western world, that they are seeking, and they are willing to Google it. They're willing to go onto YouTube and say, okay, higher and lower order of spirits, something's going on here. I don't know what my kid says they're experiencing, but I need more information. Or I feel, every third day an addictive quality that makes me want to go and eat this particular substance. And it's so bizarre and it feels almost unnatural in the way that it arises in me. Could there be something influencing me that's getting something off of this? So knowing how vast this topic is, Curtis, I know you pay attention to your analytics. I'm assuming you know what has been the most highly viewed topic that you've put out there? And these are lengthy. I know they're over an hour.
Yeah.
That you feel is of utmost importance with our current society right now that Swedenborg is offering wisdom on.
Yeah. I first want to say that it's been like this amazingly wonderful surprise to me that anyone would want to listen to the stuff that we're putting out there at all. If you would have told me 7 years ago, you're going to do a YouTube channel about Swedenborg and you'll have 10 million views on it, I would say there's zero chance of that. But I've been so surprised and heartened, not just by that you're getting views, but that you're getting impact.
Yes.
It's not just people saying, oops, I was trying to search for a cat video and I found your channel accidentally. This is weird. We get feedback all the time that people are saying, this is what I was looking for. And this is the missing piece. This is how it's changed my life. It's like sometimes I feel overwhelmed. Like, how do I manage how much life change is happening for people from what we're putting out there? So, and that again is reconfirmation to me that it's not just if people are finding it and resonating with it, to use that term, there's got to be something that's there. So, I mean, our most popular video, which actually just crossed the 1 million views mark, it was about. It's entitled, and it's a video that we never thought would get very many views. The audio qualities, I mean, the video quality is not that great and everything, but you never know what YouTube's going to grab a hold of.
Right.
And it's entitled, "Why Don't Our Loved Ones Who Have Died Communicate with Us More?" And
Wow.
I think that hits the nail on the head. Is you get people who love people and then they lose them, and the explanations break down there because something about the idea of that person that you loved was just a bunch of material. There wasn't actually, like, it's just this configuration of material. You can feel like there's no way. I mean, it's not just a body. There's a someone, there's a person in there, and and you also get to this feeling of like there's no way that they can just end. And so that video that we have there is a look at Swedenborg. But on the other hand, let's say that there's plenty of ideas out there about there being a life after death and our loved ones are in a better place and they're fine. But if that's the case, why don't they Skype us? You and I can talk to each other. Why can't they come in? So we attempted there to explain what we could get out of Swedenborg's description of what the world, the mental or spiritual world is like that we go to when we shed the body, and what our world is like, and why you might have difficulty communicating between the two. And not for everybody, obviously. You're mentioning there's people who are having these experiences or reporting them all the time, but for a lot of us, we lose somebody we love, and you don't hear anything,
Right.
and why. So that's the topic that I think gets the most interest. There's certainly a lot of interest behind the ones you were mentioning before with basically, why is my own mind against me? It
Mm-hmm.
would be the underlying question. We have a series on that, and it doesn't have the highest views, but it's got a lot, and the comments are really really purposeful. Like, people who get into those really get impacted by them. So that's definitely up there. And then some of it's just the bizarreness of the whole thing. Like, we have a video called 8 Strange Places in the Afterlife, which is just cataloging some of the farthest fringes that Swedenborg reported seeing. And sometimes people want to hear that too, which is not that different from, you'll have a show here about the 8 strangest invertebrate animals or something like that. So we like to sort of think about what are the the limits of reality. So it's a bunch of stuff, but I think at the core of it is love. And people are wondering, if there's people I love, why are they gone and where they go? And
Mm-hmm.
then, why are these things inside me trying to impede my ability to love myself and others? So it all comes back to love, which Swedenborg says love is our life. That it's totally natural that that's what we're wondering about.
Yes, and I'm impressed. I'm glad that you shared that with us, because it does say so much about how we're trying to make tangible and relevant our own personal journey, the legacy that we're leaving. We're attached to the legacy others have left. And I would be curious to know, if you want to circle back, what Swedenborg said specifically about how to maybe tune in more or resonate more with that other realm, so that we can elicit more of that experience. Because we know that there are times where, according to Swedenborg's work, and many that are trying to bring relevance to this in the healer's arena and in growing spirituality that is less dogmatic, so that we can at least agree on some verbs and have some context,
Right.
that we're always experiencing some degrees of influence or sensation and even manipulation. Depends on how thick our filters happen to be, or how prepared we are to integrate all of ourselves, as opposed to be disassociative with our own shadows, and then kind of cast them aside and tell ourselves that isn't a real part of who I am. And unfortunately, that doesn't lead to the wholeness and the inquiry and the reflection that we often need, and might even make us more vulnerable to some of those unseen forces. I did look at one video. Actually, you had several that were on a similar topic, but it had to do with subversive energies in the
Hmm.
dark field. And I think it's really important, since I want to be able to support our viewers that have someone in need. We have a huge epidemic of depression in this country and in the Western world. When I did my book signing, we kind of came out with a Did You Know game, just to discuss the applicability of why it's important to return to our wholeness and be able to use some of our intuitive discernment as a skill set. And one of the key reasons is because the number one prescribed drug in the Western world is an antidepressant. And when you think about that, it tells us that a lot of us are not integrated. A lot of us are experiencing isolation and disassociation. And if we can be preyed upon by things that exist that we don't directly perceive, in a materialistic, reductionist world that says, nope, it's all meat suit. That's all you are, and you're a bundle of nerves and neural activity and such, then we don't even know how to safeguard ourselves or discern better when we are having some of this. So can you talk a little bit about what Swedenborg discusses, and that you also shared at the conference, about kind of the higher and lower order that was again documented by Van Dusen and then Marzinski as being really, truly helpful to those that are experiencing some of these mental health issues?
Yeah, I absolutely can. I think that, I'm gonna talk to you about what Swedenborg called spirits, or he sometimes called the nice ones angels, and the mean ones evil spirits. But he said that it's all people. You think about here, there's people who you can probably think of, people who are positively impacting your life, and people who are intentionally or not making your life harder, right? And you can certainly look out at the news, and you see people behaving in really wonderful ways that you want to try to emulate, and then people just doing these horrible things and having
Mm-hmm.
these horrible priorities, right? So according to Swedenborg, we're all here in this world, but when you die, you don't dissipate. You go
Right.
on to this spiritual world. So the spiritual world is full of people, just like this world is, right? So it's just like, you can't just walk into a city that you don't know and just start talking to everyone. A lot of people are friendly, but some are not. And
Right.
some are, and there's all these like tourist scams that people run where they try to take advantage of people who don't know where they are, or don't know the scene. Swedenborg says the spiritual world is like that a lot.
Hmm.
That we are not, we are there right now. I mean, we have a spirit and a body, Swedenborg says, and so our body's in the physical world. And Swedenborg's not the only one. Everybody, a lot of traditions say that there's a spirit and a body. So the body's here. I'm in this room. Where's the spirit? The spirit is in the spiritual world. So we're sort of dual citizens right now.
Right.
So
Right.
Swedenborg is saying that just like the physical world is affecting your conscious experience, like let's say that, let's say I'm talking to you right now, and let's say I was being a really bad guest, and I was just like saying annoying things, and I would be affecting your conscious experience. I would be making you feel bad about the evening. Hopefully I'm not, but that we can do that to each other. And Swedenborg is saying that your spiritual company can do that to you as well. And
Right.
that you, just like we all live in a particular neighborhood, our spirits live in a particular neighborhood, and that
Hmm.
we are influenced right down to like Swedenborg talked about the spiritual world, and some people imagining it like a bird that was flying far off, like, oh, there's the spiritual world, I can think about it. He says no, it's like it's so close to your face that it's feathers are brushing your eye. Like the
Hmm.
spiritual world is right where we are. We are in it right now. And just like we're receiving physical input that affects everything, we talk about light deprivation and how just having the wrong light or not enough of it can affect your mood. Spiritually, we're getting input as well, too. And he
Right.
said that we are all the time in this equilibrium between love and selfishness, and that comes with an equilibrium between these two kinds of spirits, the kind benevolent spirits, like people who want to help you, and people who want to hurt you. And
Hmm.
there's varying degrees to which the spiritual world is actually aware of what we are, who we are, and where we are. But they can still affect us, and sometimes very directly, and that effect is constant. It's not like, oh, 5 years ago there was a spirit affecting me. It's like we are always receiving input. It's ubiquitous as media. You think
Hmm.
about, I'm sure you know of people that you think, oh, they're only saying that because that was on that news channel that they watch. Right.
Right.
Well, it's the same. We're all tuned into our spiritual media channels, and some of those are really toxic, and some of them are really helpful. And just like you find people here who are manipulative, and people who are psychopaths, and people who are predators, there are spiritual people who are the same way. And yeah, sometimes they can be coming after us, just like those ones are. And so you find really benevolent people, and they're interacting with us, but it's all sort of in different ways. Swedenborg talked about what he called angels, operating really more discreetly and kind of thinking about what's our purpose in life, like what are our goals. That's what they most closely interact with. Whereas the negative, kind of not helpful spiritual influences are more trying to rile up our outer emotions and get us and kind of interact with our more base thoughts and desires. And that sort of every moment we're kind of accepting and denying spiritual friend requests, and that
Mm.
the more you line up with, the more you continue to invite in and accept the things that are harmful, the more you forge those connections. And so it's really like every moment we can kind of be trying to clean up our spiritual news feed. So I'm trying to use analogies with things we work with every day, because while it sounds really weird, as I always preface it like that, but it's true that to say like there's spirits, good and bad, affecting us all the time. That's how life is on a physical level. I mean, before germs, you would have thought this is the weirdest thing in the world to think there are creatures that are living inside you, and some of them help you in your digestive system, and some of them hurt you and make you sick. But that's true. I mean, that we're
Hmm.
interacting with these in Sweden. The way Swedenborg described it, this spiritual influence, it's like that. It's like it's always around. You don't got to be freaked out by it, but you do got to watch for when it gets out of balance. And if you're sick, you got to know the root causes of it. So
Right.
yeah, in my experience with depression in particular, is that you're not just going to be able to think your way out of depression. You can't just, okay, well, there's spirits involved, so it's not going to fix you on its own. But the idea that I could see these thoughts and feelings that were coming in, and that were so aggressively anti-Curtis. Um, Whereas before I had this information, I would just think, well, that the reason I'm thinking these depressing things is just because reality is depressing, and I'm just sort of hearing reality. But if there was some other person who was saying that sort of stuff to me, I would know, like, get this person out of your life. All Swedenborg is saying is be as street smart in your head as you would be with people outside. So if a thought or a feeling is coming to you that you don't, that seems like, wait a second, this is dysfunctional, that this, nobody should be talking to me like this, you can let go of that. You can believe, this is not me. This is out from outside me. And to me, that's like having this like crowbar to pry that stuff out of my consciousness.
Right, right. I love all the correlations that you draw. You're bringing it into pop culture. Who doesn't get the social media connotations, right? And you're right. Science is constantly reinventing itself. It's apologizing for former beliefs that ended up becoming, unfortunately, adopted as theories when really they were speculations. And then those theories become academia. And then we have to go back and go, oops, let's fine tune this a little bit. True. Anything that couldn't be seen under an electron microscope or even a more primitive microscope didn't mean it didn't exist. It just means that we missed the levels of understanding. And we are in a reductionist and a materialistic driven scientific model. Once upon a time, it was polytheistic and monotheistic. And I think that the incorporation of what we used to know brought into today's relevance and applied scientifically really can shed so much light on exactly what it is that Swedenborg was really bringing with his work and trying to help people to understand, if we think that this is all we are, if we are just that 4.7% of the 100, percent of what is really truly there in the universe, then we become self-persecuting. We run out of options to be able to alleviate our suffering and our pain. And to your point, when you're talking about these higher and lower order of beings, if those voices are inside our head and we have no way to reflectively remove them because they're not ours, and instead we take responsibility for that, it's really a cyclically damaging, self-sabotaging process, isn't it, Curtis?
Yeah, I mean, the reason that Jerry Marzinski, who we mentioned before, was so enthusiastic about making this connection with Swedenborg's material and this idea is that he found that only that idea that, so he was with these patients who were hearing voices, right? And the voices were ruining their lives and just in every conceivable way. And it was only when the idea was introduced that these aren't you.
Right.
Along with these don't have your best interest in mind. That was the only thing that set these people free, at least for any amount of time.
Yes.
And so to him, it was like, you got to have this in here. And Swedenborg, he wasn't anti-science at all. He loved science. He continued to practice it. And I think it's what you mentioned of this sort of marriage of the spiritual side of things and the scientific side of things. And that he said that all of his study in anatomy, in physiology, in physics, everything that he had gotten up to then made his spiritual awakening possible because it was that knowledge that it rested on. And he says that's the relationship of the physical to the spiritual, is that they're part of a whole. And so what I imagine in the future is, because I think, yeah, we sort of had this period of like this really rigid religious control of everything, where religion was actively trying to stifle science and stifle people. And so you kind of have this reaction against that now of like, we're going to be the opposite of that. I think in the future, because the spiritual stuff keeps coming, because people keep having these experiences, it's undeniable. And so I think that there's going to be, someday there's going to be this like reconciliation of the value of the scientific method and having boundaries and things set so that we can learn, going along with a willingness to explore things that are currently taboo. And I think from that, at least that's why the reason I'm doing this work is I believe that combination is going to give us the best tools to reduce suffering, that we can get. And I think about, this idea of it's not all you in your mind. That pops up all over. I mean, you think about how many times have you been to like a meditation class or something, and they say when thoughts come into your mind, you just, instead of grabbing them, just let them go like a passing cloud. Like this is not yours. So we're familiar with that, like non-attachment. Swedenborg is just giving you the reason why you don't need to attach. Because if you are seeing, let's say you saw a piece of propaganda on a news channel or something like that, if you didn't understand that there were studios of people being funded by other people that wanted to affect the world in a certain way, you'd never be able to critically analyze that piece of media because you would never understand, well, why would anyone make this? But it's through understanding the chain that brought that to you that you can at least step back critically enough. Maybe you still agree with it, but at least you've had a chance to think it over and choose it for yourself. We're trying to do the same thing with thought, that
Mm-hmm.
there's a chain there as well. It's, that we're not isolated there, just like we're not isolated in this world.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. That was said so clean. I don't think anyone could have missed it because it was spot on, and it's something that we can all relate to. We need to be able to find that language that makes it so relatable, Curtis. And I want to talk because I think that the fact that you had so many hits of those that were seeking to connect with their loved ones, and then we can talk about the fact that they may be getting influences from realms or energies, discarnate energies that they don't want to have. What is it that allows us to actually have some say and some interplay? Now that we've got so much coming out with science talking about the fact that this really isn't a materialistic universe at all, it's about wave and frequency, and we know how many things affect wave and frequency, I do believe that Swedenborg kind of touches on this a little bit, particularly in your recent submission talking about eternity, about space-time and what we focus on, and kind of like we're honing in on dimensions based on our frequency or our focus. Can you talk to that a little bit? I really want to empower our listeners to realize that they do have a say in how much that influence has in their lives.
Yeah. There was no term space time when Swedenborg was writing, but he did over and over assert that space and time are properties of the physical world and aren't native properties of the spiritual world. That the spiritual world is completely analogous to the physical world, meaning like it's almost like the physical world is a metaphor for the spiritual world. So all the forces and laws and everything that we see and interact with here have a counterpart spiritually. Like to give a easy example, gravity. As I understand it, science is finding that gravity is this force that through somehow keeps things moving like they do. I mean, it's what organizes bodies. It's what is driving the movement of large objects in space. Gravity is what keeps us on the ground. It's what pulls us and the earth together. So love does that spiritually. So just like gravity is the organizing force that keeps things together in the physical world, in the spiritual world, people are naturally drawn together and grouped based on what they love. So
Wow.
if you have people who all love to try to dominate other people or get what they want out of other people or care only for themselves and not for the other people, you're going to be pulled towards other people who are like that. And that conglomeration of everybody who's a jerk and loving it, that's what Swedenborg calls hell. That's that state of mind. So on the flip side, he says the driving love in what he calls heaven is mutual love or concern for the happiness of others. So the more that when we're looking and specifically loving the common good, that when I'm affecting the world every day, if I'm thinking, how do I make the world a better place? That's the love that drives heaven. And so that love, the more that I try to work on it and make that not the only thing I ever feel, but that's my highest goal. That's the thing that's the most important in my life. That is pulling me into heaven in spirit. And so
Right.
the more that we are working to, and he really says that our part in this whole thing is more just to reject what we know we don't want. And so that the more that I can take a moment when I get this impulse to snap back at somebody or get even or do something that's dysfunctional, if I can resist that and do it not just because I don't want to get caught or I need a ride home from this person, the more I can do that because I actually care about not inflicting harm and I care about trying to contribute to the common good. Every time I do that, I change my address just a little bit
Right.
spiritually.
Right. I mean, it probably, if science was going to look at it, and I'm always trying to incorporate science. My background is in philosophy and more than anything else, spiritual philosophy. But science and spirituality and the philosophy that brings it together can be friends if we can just agree to some terms. If it's about resonance and frequency and vibrations being able to attract one another or to be able to run in harmonic wave with one another, you kind of look at it again from a place that deals with pop culture. If I want to feel good and at a vibration that's akin to meditation or prayer or sleep, I'm not going to put on heavy metal music. I'm not going to go walking into the latest horror flick movie. That'll be a different frequency. It will have an impact on my frequency. I will either acclimate to it or I will need to leave the room. But one thing or another, there will be some sort of harmonization that will take place. Would you suggest that Swedenborg touched on that when it came to identifying with some of the influences that we might have felt were maybe subversive, or trying to align with deceased family members or higher order beings when it came to holding the energy for ourselves?
Right. So Swedenborg, when he first started having these spiritual experiences, it was as strange to him as it would be to anyone else who had not had them. And but the thing that was both most striking to him and most undeniable after he'd been in it for a little while is that, as I said, we're always in the company of spirits. And it's just not it's because that's how consciousness works. It's just like in a, I know I'm always drawing metaphors, but this is the Swedenborgian in me, because he says everything is that by looking at the way this world operates, that's the way we can learn about how the spiritual reality operates. That just like in an ecosystem here, you're always, surrounded. You always have to have the steps above and below you on the chain in order to survive.
Yeah.
We're part of this great spiritual ecosystem that people who are on earth, you're talking about vibrations and levels. We're filling out these different levels because it's like this great chain of life. You got to have people on all steps. So we're on a step, and directly above and below us there are these spirits. And so we're always, in order for us to have consciousness doesn't exist just in a vacuum. Like to have a Skype conversation, you've got to have machines that are specifically configured in order to transmit these signals and let the whole thing happen.
Right.
Our consciousness depends on our connection to the spiritual world through these spirits. So we're always associated with spirits. And for Swedenborg, he was in this state of consciousness where the worlds were very open. And so the connections he had became very aware of him and he of them. And so, but he was finding out that he was always being influenced by these spirits, even down to he recorded like craving, like you mentioned, cravings for particular foods. Like
Exactly.
there were spirits that liked butter and spirits that didn't, and that there's meaning behind it all. It's because it's not that those spirits are physically tasting the butter, but like I said, everything in the physical world has a spiritual counterpart.
Yes.
So what the butter what a butter corresponded to matched with those spirits. So it's kind of like whatever you go and do, there are spirits enjoying an analog of it along with you. And so you can think like, what kind of company am I attracting? And it's sort of like, a cat, a stray cat, you feed it, it's going to be back. So the more we're feeding these associations, it's, the more chance it is that it's going to be harder and harder to break out of those. And if you, I guess, and the funny thing is, I know I've been sort of dodging your question about how do you sort of connect to higher beings and loved ones and things, because he doesn't give you a lot of really easy steps to do that, but he gives you these general principles that you kind of deduct back from. And what it seems like is the more you can do with things like, if you imagine an angel, everyone's got like, or something like that, or a guide, or whatever people call them, imagine some kind of loving, wise being. What kind of stuff do they like to do? What kind of stuff do they think is fun? The more you're doing that, the more you're making you a fun place to hang out. And you're making these associations stronger, that when we engage in these things like mutual love, kindness, in whatever form that takes. I'm not saying everyone's got to play a harp. There's plenty of cool stuff that you can be doing, right? But the more that we're doing that, the more Swedenborg talked about when he was doing these good, loving things, the angels were twice as happy about it as he was. So that we can make ourselves it's not like we're ever going to be abandoned by the higher side of things. Like they love everyone. This is like, imagine, the most loving person and them just growing and growing in love and wisdom. So then it's not like you earn the right for them to care about you or not, but it's all about access, that because we have this crucial freedom of consciousness, we can really open the door or shut it to either the higher or the lower. So it's all about just opening that door, and the higher, the heaven, is very much not going to force where we don't want them. So if we're not listening, we're not going to pick them up. Whereas the lower stuff is a lot pushier. As anyone with a brain could tell you, it's just like the negative thoughts come a lot more easily than the positive thoughts, but the positive are stronger.
They do, Curtis, and I think that that is so relevant. I love what you're sharing about how to elevate our consciousness, but since we do have such an issue not only with depression, we know that also our society is just riddled with all forms of addiction. We've got porn addiction, we've got different types of opioid and pain-killing addictions, and people are looking to get into another sphere of consciousness. They're looking to shift the way that they feel. They're trying to mitigate their pain. You know, we know that we are drawn as human beings either towards creating more pleasure in our life or avoiding more pain. And sometimes we just want to numb out because we can't find that golden mean. When we have an addiction, based on what Swedenborg has talked about and what was studied, obviously, by Van Dusen as a follow-up, there is an element with which, because we share space with the spiritual world, isn't it also understood that sometimes their provocation, this discarnate energy that is in our field with us, is going to sound like our voice in our head, that we want to engage in a behavior or in a substance, some activity that actually feeds them, that they can feel that we're maybe on a wavelength of susceptibility to. Can you talk to that point a little bit, Curtis?
Sure, and if you ever get the chance to talk to Jerry Marzinski, that this is his specialty here, because he's saying that there are these bad spirits that are constantly trying to get you to indulge in things that they want to do along with you, you know, and that he talks about, like, there's a sort of the lead up to a drink in any alcoholic's mind of like, well, it's fine. And I've talked to other people who have been in recovery, and that you just kind of go on this process of like, you just driving along, you get this thought of like, well, you could pull over here even if you don't go into the bar. Okay, cool. So I'll just pull over. Well, I could go in, but I will just get food. I won't drink. You know, you just kind of set yourself up more. I could have beer in the fridge as long as I don't drink it. I just give it to my friends. So you trying to sort of getting groomed to be closer.
They're like the ultimate seducers and hijackers then, in a way, aren't you saying, Curtis?
Yeah. Yeah. Because, you know, it's predatory. It's predatory that if you've made your life, you know, Swedenborg says that these kind of spirits he's talking about are people who have made their life consist in harmful things, that was what the most important thing to them was. And whether it's just like what he calls love of the world, or like you're trying to get some kind of just pleasure high, or whether it's love of dominion, or your drug of choice is controlling and manipulating people, whichever one it is, you need people to help you get there. I mean, so what they're trying to do is try to get you to do what they want, and sort of you be a tool for them rather than you're looking out for your own life. And for Jerry working with his patients, it's to break out of something like addiction is really difficult to do. And for him, he realized that the addicts needed to have some fuel to the fight. Like, what's going to really motivate you to want to get out? And the realization that, you know, something outside you is trying to ruin your life. Sometimes that was the motivation, because otherwise it's like, oh, I like this is helping me, or like, why should I? But as soon as we realize, like, no, there's something is my enemy, and it's trying to take what's mine, my life, away from me. There's something that triggers in you that gives you sort of this will to fight back against it. And again, it's just a part of it. You know, he talked about people still needing to go through treatment to try to resolve this, but that was just this crucial piece, is to realize, just to step back and think, like, objectively, do I actually want this? Like, beyond the craving that I'm having right now, if I look at my life and where it leads me, is this actually me that wants this?
Right.
You know, because I may be feeling a want for it, but does it make any sense at all that I would want to do this right now, knowing who I am and the bag I'll be stuck holding tomorrow? You know, like, that's the first step, is like, wait a second, no, I don't want this. Because then instead of it's just the cravings, it's you against the cravings, and that's the first step.
You know, there was a beautiful practice that was on that most recent YouTube submission about, you know, living in eternity. You had a female guest that came on, and she used a term that I'm going to need you to remind me of, that had to do with saying, I am not that. And it's interesting because there's a big practice right now that kind of takes that sort of Judeo-Christian experience of Moses, you know, with the fiery bush, I am that I am. There's a large following that says what that's really saying, and I find it interesting because it does parlay into this discussion, to look at everyone around you and all sentient life around you and the construct of this matrix that we're living in and saying, I am that, I am, is a creative and an affirmative gesture to say, I'm connected to everything, and maybe create or incite more reflection on how am I non-judgmentally accepting and rising my vibration to one of love and compassion and forgiveness. But on the flip side, when someone's being tormented by energies that feel subversive and attacking and maybe again kind of hijacking, as you had stated, there was a practice that the woman that submitted in that last video, she talked about not associating with it and getting into dialogue so that it didn't have that power to consume her. Can you speak to that for our viewers tonight?
Yeah, so it's not all love. Swedenborg was very clear that there's love and wisdom, because you can't in all, right, you got this outreach of compassion that you're talking about, that I am this, I am that, like seeing our connectedness. But there are certain things that the more we feel connected to them, the worse off we get, right? So it's about where do you apply. It just like everything, just like the physical, it's great to give someone a hug unless they have the flu. You don't want to do it then, right?
Right.
Because it doesn't matter how much you love them, you're going to get the flu. And then you're not going to be able to help them out at all while they have the flu. So how do you distinguish and how do you apply rightly when you associate further? Because according to Swedenborg, our concept of the self really has a huge impact on how we're doing spiritually. So you want a healthy conception of the self, which is this, what you described, more like I am a part of this larger whole, like I'm a joyful part of this larger whole, and I'm not isolated and separate from it. The negative sense of self is basically like I'm the only thing that matters,
Mm-hmm.
I'm so there's two kinds of ways you can get into it. There's the like aggressive bad sense of self, which is like I'm the only thing that matters, I'm going to go out and do anything I want, and we all, the rest of us all pay the price for that, right?
Right.
But there's also the other side of it, which is the like, oh, self-loathing, or like I'm miserable. But that would be like constantly being open to self-evaluation, like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
do I measure up or not? Which I'd say the antidote to that is the first kind of self, to realize that no, I'm just a perfect part of the fabric here. Not that I
Mm-hmm.
lose my sense of individual identity, but that my value isn't up for discussion.
Right.
That according to Swedenborg, that we're all, every single person is of ultimate value, because we are
Mm-hmm.
all actually playing a role that nobody else can play, that everybody has their own miniature form of the universe in them. That he says everything comes back to love and wisdom, like I was
Right.
saying, and that
Mm-hmm.
that we all actually love and think in a way that's different than anyone else ever could. And that might seem less consequential in the physical world, but as I said before, love is spiritual gravity and wisdom is spiritual light, right? There are these two great forces. So the fact that we have our own unique sort of conduit for this part of the divine is giving us this essential role to play. So I would say the dark side of things will always try to, if you're vulnerable to it, make you worry about your value and worry about your trajectory, like, is my life going in the right direction? But that stuff is non-negotiable. I mean,
Right.
the divine providence, Swedenborg called it, this effort that's drawing us all towards the best possible outcome. That's going on, and everybody is exactly where they need to be. It's really not like, am I valuable or not? It's just like, can I work to push away what I know is harmful and try to adopt what I know is right? That's what matters. Not like, how many friends do I have? Do I have nice hair? Those sorts of things, or
Mm-hmm.
do I because it's going to come out all right as long as we can look towards mutual love and sort of push away this competitive mindset that's causing all these problems in the first place.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, all experience appears to be relevant. It's really, what experiences do you want to have? Are you wanting to be in joy? Are you wanting to be in a place that builds you up and allows you to feel relevant in a context that isn't about ego and it isn't sociopathic or narcissistic? It's about being part of a whole that, like you said, is love and it is light. Or do I want to dance on the dark side for a little bit, but I have to recognize that there's consequences for living in that vibration and being influenced in that vibration? This is such a relevant topic. I know that our viewers are hungry for more information. Can you take a moment and tell them where to find you with specificity, Curtis?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, the easiest way to do it is just go to youtube.com/offtheLeftEye. And that tagline is a reference to a spiritual experience Swedenborg had where he sort of had his spiritual site opened. You could also go to Swedenborg.com. That's our website. From there, you can find links to the videos. And there's a lot of topics in there. But if you just search Swedenborg and then anything on YouTube, we probably made a video about it. And there's not that many people making Swedenborg videos. So you'll probably find us. But yeah, the easiest way, youtube.com/offtheLeftEye.
Well, your work has been exceptional and it's entertaining, and that is not an easy thing to do when you're marketing online spirituality. So my hat is off to you, Curtis. Thank you so much for being our guest tonight. And I just want to say to our viewers, listen, there is so much more to be understood about the complexity of nature, of our existence, and of all that we have the opportunity to choose to experience if we are willing to be educated and then draw application. We're thrilled to have you here tonight. We're glad that you got this content. If you're looking for more of these answers, please do look at Curtis Childs and the Swedenborg Foundation through his YouTube channel, and take a look at Solutionary TV and see what books and materials and also trainings are available to you. Consider being a sponsor and a patron so we can keep this content, because together we are the solution.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.